everybody, and welcome to The Score. This is where we make sense of hiring trends, we sort science from fiction, and we find out what's new in talent acquisition from some of the top experts in the field. I'm Nicola Tatham. I'm the Chief IO Psychologist here at Sova, with over 2 decades of experience designing fair, predictive, and science-backed assessments. I'm here to cut through the noise and talk about what actually works in hiring.
And I'm Caroline Fry, Head of Product at Sova. I spend my time turning smart assessment ideas from Nick into tools that work, scalable, inclusive, and ready for whatever AI throws at us next. Today, we're joined by Jarret Hardie, Chief Technology Officer at Sova. Jarret leads the architecture, development, and ongoing evolution of the Sova talent assessment platform, and he's our go-to oracle for all things AI. We'll be picking his brain to find out where he sees the future of talent assessment heading, especially when it comes to AI and emerging tech. Jarret is also my boss, so I'm going to be on my best behavior.
So before we dive into the serious stuff, let's warm up with a quick one. We always like to ask our guests about the strangest, most entertaining, or just plain awful question that they've ever been asked in an interview or a hiring process. We've heard everything from, if you were a kitchen utensil, what would you be, to asking someone to solve a riddle. So Jarret, can you share what's your most memorable one, perhaps?
Well, I certainly can. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and hopefully we'll have an enjoyable conversation today. But to kick us off, I was trying to think about the strangest interview question I've ever had, and it's really more of an interview snafu. So early on in my career, I was interviewing for a role as a software developer, and it was a government position, in fact, and I was asked what my experience was with Microsoft Point. Now, I think the reviewer, who didn't know what he was asking, meant Microsoft SharePoint, but I thought he meant Microsoft Paint. And so we had a very entertaining discussion going back and forth about brush sizes, colors, and font choice. And at no point did he stop me and say, no, you've got really the wrong end of the stick here.
Did you get the job?
And I did not get the job, needless to say.
Okay. Let's start with a pretty broad question, Jarret. We hear a lot about AI in recruitment now, and some of it sounds like science fiction. So what does AI actually look like day to day in talent assessment?
It's a really interesting question. There's certainly a lot of hype out there. Everybody's talking about AI, but the reality is right now, AI in assessment is more practical than science fiction. Certainly it's not very whizzy at the moment. We've got automatic scoring. That's probably the biggest use of AI in assessment. It was quite useful. Scoring automatically an open-ended response used to take hours and hours of manual review. That would be, say, your pre-recorded video interview response or a written response to a problem-solving exercise. I think we've also got a lot of people looking at using AI to reduce bias in hiring. So AI doesn't see names, doesn't see photos, it doesn't make assumptions based on your writing style. So rather than drowning in volume, AI, I think at the moment for a lot of recruiters, are giving efficiency and providing better data to humans rather than making the decisions or replacing them. I think we're going to see an awful lot of change to more exciting uses of AI, some of which we're going to talk about today, I hope. But at the moment, it's a very pragmatic use of AI.
Thank you. So jumping from that forward a little bit. So what's something that you think AI is really good at in assessment? And then perhaps contrast that with something that you believe it's still struggling with.
The best thing I think that AI can do at the moment is apply consistency and scale. Never has a bad day, never gets tired after thinking or reviewing 50 different responses. And I think that's probably the best thing for AI at the moment, particularly when you look at, say, scoring video interview responses, you get consistency in a way that probably removes a certain amount of bias, rather than I think what a lot of people intuitively think, that it might introduce bias into the process.
Which is a really interesting point, because I think linked to that, I guess my question is, why does it get such a bad rap then? You know, from people that perhaps don't know as much as you do about AI. You know, you hear candidates, you hear, you know, people working in talent acquisition that are really fearful of AI making the decisions that humans, or making recommendations or producing scores on individuals that humans would have done previously.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Candidates are really keen on leveraging AI in the hiring process when they apply for roles. We've heard a lot about the AI-powered candidate, but they're not quite so keen on being evaluated by AI. There have been some pretty serious missteps in the past. AI has kind of been coming up in the world of assessment over the last 5-6 years, maybe even a little bit before that. And some of the early attempts were rife with problems. So we certainly read a lot of news about candidates who were all being assessed based on flawed training data. And I think that's probably the number one concern. If there are biases in your existing hiring processes or within your organization and culture, and you train the AI on that data, it will replicate those biases. I think that's probably the number one concern for candidates.
I guess you kind of talked to that point a little bit when you talked about training data. Are there any other specific aspects of assessment that you think AI is just not doing a good job at yet?
It's not very good with context and nuance. So I think a lot of unconventional answers that a human would view as innovative or indicative of somebody who is a creative thinker might get flagged by AI as wrong. Now, Gen AI, with the advent of ChatGPT, is certainly changing that, because the AI is getting a lot better at understanding the flow of natural human conversation. But a lot of the tools that are in the assessment space now, I think, probably would struggle with things that are a little bit offbeat, or maybe a little sarcastic, or just different than a lot of the very straight conservative answers that candidates might have given in the past that were used for training the AI.
Because I think, the progress that's been made with Gen AI, there has been a flood of AI-powered tools. As a tech leader, how do you view this trend, and how do you interpret certain bold marketing claims? Because as we see, everything is imbued with AI, and it can do a lot of things for a lot of people very quickly. But how do you separate what's real and what's wishful thinking at this point?
My favorite question, actually. There is a term out there for a lot of these AI-powered tools that are flooding the market, and it's called AI washing. So somebody will take an existing platform, put a chatbot interface on it, and call it AI-powered. Or they might take something that really is just existing rules-based logic that dates back for decades and call it AI. So I think there's a lot of confusion for people out there as to whether something really is using AI or not. And in many cases, it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as it gets the job done, whether it's actually powered by AI or powered by something more conventional but called AI. But real AI takes significant data science expertise and substantial training sets. So when we're looking at a tool out there, or when I'm looking at a tool out there, I'm looking to understand what data was it trained on? How does it measure bias? Are there validation studies? Legitimate AI tools are going to have concrete answers to those questions.
So I guess when we're looking at this within the assessment space, the rules haven't changed with regards to what's important. It's back to those basic fundamental principles. Is it reliable? Is it valid? Is it fair? And if it can't say yes to those three things, then it's probably not going to be a great assessment to use.
That's one of the reasons I think that we should be optimistic about the use of AI in assessment, because we're used to having to validate the data. We're very used to collecting information and auditing bias. We're one of the industries that has got decades of experience doing that. I think that actually bodes really well for the use of AI in assessment.
Thank you. So let's move on slightly and let's talk about agentic AI. So for the non-tech crowd, how would you explain that in plain English?
We think about traditional AI, it's basically a smart calculator. You ask it something specific and it gives you an answer. Agentic AI, on the other hand, you give it a broader goal, and it has the ability to plan ahead, to do some research, to figure out the steps needed to achieve that goal, to adapt its approach as it learns more from its research and what it's doing, and to make decisions along the way. So I think the best example I saw out there was, it's the difference between traditional AI, where you would say, what's the weather this weekend? And it would tell you, and saying, help me plan my weekend, where it would go away and ask you, okay, where are you going? When do you want to arrive? And look at the weather, suggest activities, book hotels, potentially book tickets to a show if that's what you said you wanted to do. That's agentic AI. And if I think about the application for assessment space, we're a long way from this, but people are moving in that direction. Imagine handing Agentic AI a job description. I would like to hire an accountant in London. Agentic AI would do the research on the role, maybe ask you a few questions, post the role, manage moving the applications through a sort of a pre-screening vetting phase, moving you on to the assessment process, and then finally producing a pool of candidates. A bit scary, but that's really what Agentic AI is about, something that can get things done for you.
Yeah, and you mentioned there's a bit scary. I think lots of people fall in, a mix across excitement and caution around both of these things, and especially, the idea that systems can act on their own. And so when you think about that kind of scenario, using agentic AI in those kinds of ways, what kind of guardrails do you think we need in place?
It's really interesting. So we've been talking about how agentic AI is basically systems that can take action without somebody having to click approve at every single step of the journey. That is powerful. But although that gives you efficiency and capability, I think it brings with it a lot of complex compounded risks. Because agentic AI is working with vast amounts of data with minimal oversight, you have a potential increase in cybersecurity threats, legal liabilities, compliance failures, and the guardrails for those really come back to some of the basics. I kind of think there's three layers of guardrails. There's the technical layer, the process layer, and the transparency layer. I think on the technical layer, you need systems that can explain their decisions. So if you can't really dive into how your agentic AI made the choice it did to book you that ticket for Saturday night at 7, or to recommend these 10 candidates for advancement to the next stage, you've got no way to make sure that the AI isn't picking up on some irrelevant detail or being misdirected by all sorts of red herring patterns that aren't really relevant. The process layer is really your human intervention. So you got to have human checkpoints at critical moments, because otherwise you don't have the opportunity for people to come in and apply an organization's governance policies around AI usage or around any of the other legal frameworks that you might be bound by. I think you also need a key human intervention at certain points. So if you're going to be doing a hiring process using agentic AI, obviously the checkpoint, deciding who to interview, deciding who to hire, has to be made by the human and not the agent in order to minimize your risk. And finally, we need the transparency layer. People need to know that they're interacting with an AI system. So rather than trying to pretend that there's actually a human on the other end, which I think is what most of the utility companies that you deal with in a chat window pretend, it's better to be upfront about it. And that way, I think people will know that they are dealing with something that is going to be behaving in a certain way. They won't reveal any personal details that they don't have to. They're going to, bring their own judgment and caution to the process. I think we're going to see this evolving a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if there are going to be official ISO standards around this in the near future. Certainly there's going to be legislation.
Yeah, don't get me started on the utility chatbots. I've been in conversation with quite a few of them of late. They're not good for me. So that kind of leads us on to the next question. I think some of the standards and principles that you're describing, obviously in assessment, trust is a really big deal from every perspective, whether that's you as the recruiter, you as the candidate, you as the test provider. So how do we build AI that people, i.e. candidates and clients, can actually trust? How do we get to that stage?
I think start with the last thing I said, actually, which was the transparency. Gone are the days where we would just say, trust me, the algorithm knows best. That doesn't work anymore. Candidates want to know what's being measured and why. I think it's kind of like showing your work when you did maths at school. For hiring managers, I think that the important thing is for them to be able to drill down and see why someone was flagged, for example, as a strong fit. So no black boxes. And that over time, I think, builds trust in the system, that you have the ability to fully examine whatever it's doing at kind of every step of the way. I also think consistency is a key element in building trust. So traditional interviews vary widely. We know that. Well-trained interviewers can be more consistent than pretty much anybody else, but nevertheless, it does vary widely. AI in recruitment, if it's done right, evaluates every candidate against the same criteria every time. And this builds a certain amount of fairness over time. And I think the other thing is to give people agency, maybe not the best choice of words when we're talking about agentic AI, to empower people. So things like candidates can retake assessments if there was a technical issue, or hiring managers can override the AI recommendation. The AI really should feel like a smart assistant, not a dictator. And I think one of the key ways that organizations can help that is to ensure that their policies, their recommendations, their guidelines in an organization see AI as that smart assistant, not as a crutch. We don't want people to become lazy and sort of blindly accept everything that the AI does. So it's a balancing act, I think.
I guess also as IOs, it's our job to ensure that we continue to support our clients, to encourage them to ask questions of us, of other suppliers, to continue to work with that data. I mean, something can look really cool and can feel really cool, but is it actually predicting success in the role? Does the assessment predict what it says it's going to predict? Or, what we don't want to do is go back to some of those models that you described earlier that were based on somewhat flawed data, and you're seeing all those issues. So adverse impact and validity remain at the forefront of whatever assessment route anybody decides to go down.
And it's a continual process, isn't it? You're absolutely right. It's not just sort of releasing something into the wild and you never touch it again. It's an ongoing review as you continue on through using a particular tool on a regular basis.
So we've talked about fairness from that sort of psychometric perspective and candidates especially, but how do you think about it from a technology and AI angle?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. So as you were just saying, Nick, we've been looking at testing for bias and adverse impact for decades and have to continue doing that even when the AI is using the assessment. I think AI introduces a couple of new wrinkles, and then the phrase for it is proxy discrimination. So AI is great because it might never see somebody's race or somebody's gender, but it could still learn to discriminate based on proxies, like a postcode or school name, or even writing patterns that correlate with certain protected characteristics. So it kind of depends what information comes up in the AI. I think one of the greatest opportunities for agentic AI in the assessment space is dynamic assessment, so that candidates don't all see the same question. For example, the AI responds fluidly as the assessment process is ongoing. But that means that every candidate has an opportunity to introduce different information about themselves to the AI. So some candidate might, for example, start talking about their school, and they might name the school. And that is what we call proxy discrimination. If that kind of introduces something that might send the AI off on a certain theme that results in a skewed interpretation for that particular candidate. I think the other interesting thing, and this is one of the most basic ones, we're going to start allowing, I think, candidates to use AI in assessment before long, as an industry. There are going to be assessments out there to test a candidate's ability to work with Gen AI tool. And I think if we're going to start doing that, in fairness, we're going to have to actually supply candidates with an AI tool in the assessment process itself, so that everybody gets the same AI tool, and you don't have those candidates with greater financial means able to purchase a subscription to a much more powerful AI agent, for example. All these little things are going to come out of the woodwork, I think, very quickly now as we move forward with this.
It's leveling the playing field still, isn't it? That's not gone away, regardless of the methodology that we use. So yeah, I agree. So you had a crystal. Oh, sorry, Caroline.
I was just going to say, it's back to those fundamental principles you've been talking about the whole way through, and which, as Jarret said, we're sort of uniquely placed or well placed in our industry to look at, because that's what we've always been doing.
We are definitely, I think, in a good place to do that, because we've already got the discipline, we've got the ways of measuring that kind of bias, and we've got, I think, the people within our organizations that are used to doing that kind of data analysis.
And that multidisciplinary sort of way of working is really coming to the fore, from here on in, really, isn't it? IOs do not work in isolation anymore. They're working with, as Caroline said, right from the start, we work together closely. We work with you, Jarret, work with data scientists, so on and so forth. So if you've got a crystal ball, Jarret, where's the intersection of AI and assessments heading, do you think, in the next few years?
I think we're heading towards something that looks a lot less like traditional testing and more like natural conversation and observation. So I think the future isn't longer assessments with AI. I think it's a lot smarter assessments, if you like. And I would say there are three big shifts coming. The first, I think, is that assessments are going to get a lot more adaptive and personalized. So, like I said a couple minutes ago, rather than everybody getting the same set of questions, AI can adjust in real time based on how somebody is responding to an assessment. If somebody's struggling in one particular area, AI can help move on to explore some other topic. AI, if it has enough information to already assess certain traits, could even shorten the assessment. I think we're going to see a lot more dynamic assessments, which would be more interesting, I think, for the people that are taking them. I think we will also move to multimodal assessments. So right now, our assessments are heavily dependent on text, written responses, multiple choice. And that's still going to be the case. But I think AI offers more sophisticated ways to analyze how somebody approaches a problem using voice, video, other ways of interaction. I think for those candidates who would prefer not to read a bunch of text and would prefer to talk to the AI and hear from the AI, this introduces some interesting opportunities in accessibility that weren't there before. And I think we're also going to see continuous assessment. So rather than take this half-hour long test and then that's your result forever, here's a brief interaction that gives us some meaningful insights. And if you join our team, we'll keep learning about your strengths and growth areas over time. I think AI offers a way to do that at scale that's not currently possible with traditional assessment measures as they are. That's my prediction anyway. We'll see if I'm right.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, we'll get you back in a few years' time and check out your crystal ball. Great. Thank you, Jarret, for going through those with us. We have a little segment next called Science or Fiction. We'll read out some bold claims about assessments and AI and everything in between, and you can tell us whether they're backed by science or just our industry myth. So no pressure, Jarret, but we are counting on you to separate fact from fluff. So, the first one, AI is only as fair as the data it learns from.
That is science, fact. I think there's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, and that's definitely true when it comes to AI. If you use biased historical data, you'll get biased outcomes. But here's the twist. I think AI can actually help you identify bias in your data. So the same AI that might be persuaded to repeat the mistakes of the past can also look for patterns that humans might not have recognized are there in the data and point them out.
Okay, little spin at the end there. I was thinking the same when you talked earlier about agentic AI and this proxy bias. Is that a way that you could leverage some parts of the AI to review itself, in real time and actually pull those issues out with it, rather than just blindly trusting that everything's fine and moving on?
Definitely. That's exactly the kind of thing that AI is really good at. If you're looking at tens of thousands of hours of conversation, it's impossible for a human to review all of those. So exactly as you said, the AI it's a bit marking its own homework, but it would have to be a separate AI system. But I think it's an opportunity there rather than a threat.
Okay, that's one down, I think.
I ask the next one.
Yeah.
Agentic AI will need its own ethical code. Is that science or fiction?
I think that is definitely science. The landscape is changing so quickly with AI, especially when you think about agentic AI and some of the decisions that it has to make along the process. Even if the human is the final decision maker, there are going to be some rules. And I think we're going to see AI systems increasingly publishing and being public. The most famous example that just came up the other week, one of the AI providers out there, Anthropic, has released a new version of its tool, Claude version 4. And one of the selling features of Claude version 4 is that it is extremely good at writing computer code. So developers can use it to help them with increasingly complex programming tasks. But someone testing it shortly after release threatened to replace Claude with a different AI tool. And Claude resorted to blackmail in threatening to expose the developer for some misdeed so as to protect its own existence, as it explained. And I think that's the kind of behavior that the ethical code is going to be incredibly important in stopping.
Yeah, we're getting towards science fiction rather than science or
Very
fiction at
much.
that point, right? Yeah. Okay, the next one, science or fiction. Explainability is more important than accuracy in assessments.
That's a good one. I think fiction, sort of. So obviously, in hiring, you do need explainability, but I would pick a more accurate model every single time. I think a slightly less accurate model that can explain better than a black box is great, but an inaccurate model that explains itself, well, is just confidently wrong, and that doesn't really help anybody at all.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next one is a great user interface can hide a bad model.
Unfortunately, that is definitely science. I think we can see a lot of very slick, very well packaged and promoted products out there, not just in the assessment space, but everywhere online. And polish can absolutely mask poor performance. So the nightmare scenario is that candidates in assessment would have a really smooth experience, a really enjoyable experience. But if the assessment isn't actually predictive, then that doesn't really matter.
It's no different from the last 20, 30 years in assessment where you get, certain new assessments pop up and, they look amazing, but when you dig into the technical manual, it doesn't exist, for example. Some of the more like the pop psychology world, and people might be persuaded to go down that route if they don't fully understand the research that has to go into assessments of that nature. So yeah, I guess that's not new news. It's just being applied in a different setting, really, isn't it?
Okay, next one, science or fiction. Most companies don't know what their AI is actually doing.
Science. There's increasing awareness, I think, that organizations need to become more proactive in evaluating the AI in their organization. Early on, it was really only a couple of years ago, a lot of the researchers building these systems didn't often know how the system came to the answer it came to. And so I think that's part of it. Nobody could actually explain it. There are so many layers of computer thought, that go into producing the answer. It is difficult to kind of audit all the way through it. So I think that initially was some of the difficulty. And the other is the hype. People are just excited. They're looking for efficiency. They're looking for ROI and deep investigation into how the engine works.
It takes a lot of time to get to that.
Yeah, and possibly you need a level of expertise or interest in your organization about how these sorts of things work. I think you probably experience that quite often, Nick, when you get into the statistics of psychometrics and things. There's a level there that people do need to grasp to understand. And without that, it gets a bit opaque. And some people are almost nervous, I think, of, those kinds of models or mathematical models generally, if that's not something that they're trained in or have experience with, which is why it's even more important, I think, when you find somebody like Jarret or others that can explain some of this functionality or the way that these things work in that plain English. So everybody can really get a bit of insight about what's going on. I think that's a lesson for us.
It's important for people to start becoming more comfortable with this so that they can ask questions without feeling stupid. I think a lot of people in organizations, because generative AI or agentic AI is so new, are a little afraid to stick their hand up and question the output of some of these organizations. It's a tremendous financial backing and therefore must be right, which it isn't the case. I think we need a lot of people to be brave in voicing their concerns.
Yeah, brave and willing to challenge. Our next one, I can't remember whether it's me or you, Caroline, but I'll ask them. I think our next science or fiction is human oversight is a fallback, not a feature.
Definitely fiction. I think the best AI human teams aren't there without humans. I think organizations will get the most out of AI if it's designed for collaboration from the start.
AI is going to become our new best friend at work. Yeah,
that's right. It's a smart assistant.
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll maybe pleased to hear this is the final science or fiction we're going to grill you with, Jarret. The future of assessment is adaptive, not automated.
Science. I think automation really just does the same thing faster. And I think adaptation means the assessment gets smarter, the assessment gets more interesting, the assessment gets more predictive, I think that's really where things are going. So there's certainly, AI is all about efficiency, definitely, cost savings, 100%. But it's not just about doing the same thing in a different way. It's about bringing new capabilities into the process.
It's building on what we've been doing for the last 20 years, but taking it to the extreme, isn't it? And doing it in a far more intelligent way than some of the adaptive testing that we've been using thus far with more traditional psychometric assessments.
I think it absolutely is right. I mean, psychometric assessment is an industry that, in my view, is ideally suited to take advantage of AI for those reasons.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the future's bright. I think we wanted to wrap up by asking you to perhaps leave our listeners with one key insight or one reflection. So if there's one thing that you'd like people to remember from this episode, Jarret, what would that be?
The value of AI in recruitment right now is providing better data to humans, not replacing them.
Which I think will be very encouraging for a lot of our listeners that might be quite fearful about AI and the direction of travel.
I think that's right. A lot of the science fiction scenarios would see, I think, the entire recruitment process replaced entirely by agentic AI, and that's not going to happen.
Well, then we get to the point where the robots are just assessing the robots because the candidates are using AI to fill in the assessments, and then, who's actually doing any of the real work? I think, we were going to close this with thoughts from myself and Caroline as well. I think for me, I've really enjoyed this session. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot. I think one of my takeaways is some of the basic, whilst we're working with new, modern, really exciting technology, what we shouldn't be forgetting is some of the principles. So, we've talked about what good assessment looks like. We've talked about ethical codes. I think we need to remember that and not put the brakes on as such, but ask the right questions of the right people. And, as assessment providers ourselves, we need to be asking those questions of ourselves and making sure that we're not, going down a route that's going to get us into unsafe territory. We need to know that we can explain anything that we produce, which is what we've all been doing for the last X number of years. So I think that's my key takeaway. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Caroline?
I think, I echo everything you said. Thank you, Jarret, for your engagement and, experience talking us through some of this. I think, as you and I both know, AI is very much a big part of our world at the moment. And I think one thing that I heard, because you can get quite overwhelmed by the rate of change and the breadth of capabilities and the positive and negative that, AI brings on both, assessment platform side, psychometric side, candidate side. One piece of advice that I heard that I think still sort of rings true as I look back through this discussion is that start small. You don't need to replace, or embed AI end to end in your whole process, straight off the bat. You don't need to look for a provider that claims that AI does everything in their platform and it brings all these productivity, like specifically because you need to keep all of that human oversight. You need to know exactly what your AI is doing. We're making serious decisions that affect people's lives. You can start small. You don't have to throw out everything you've done before. You can keep to the same principles. I think that would probably be my reflection. Like, it can, every time these sorts of new trends come in, they can feel a bit overwhelming, but you don't have to, step away from everything you've ever done or the processes that work or the things that you rely on, but just start small, to start building in things that are going to give you productivity gains. And there's a lot to be excited about. So the caution shouldn't sort of stop you or make you fearful either. It's probably quite a lot of jumbled thoughts, but a few things flying around.
Very good advice.
Yeah, it's really sensible. So thanks for tuning into The Score. If you had fun or you learned something new or just enjoyed hearing us talk about the future of assessments, make sure to catch the next episode. We'll be dropping every 2 weeks on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your talent assessment fixed. And we hope to see you there. Thank you.